Prebno serve on our advisory board, and U.S. District Court Judge Jack Thunheim, the chair of the Board of Advisors at the Humphrey School, is also on our working board. So we have very close ties to this school and to Augsburg. And now a word about our conference. One of the core principles, as you've heard this morning, of the Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights is empowerment of women. In fact, there's a paragraph in their strategic plan that speaks to gender engagement as a core value in all of their projects. In planning our conference, we wanted to combine the core values and the principles of the Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights with a conference here. One of our panelists this morning, Ingrid Stange, is the founder of a remarkable organization in Norway called Partnership for Change. And each year, Partnership for Change and the Oslo Center work together to present a conference on issues facing our globe. This year, one of the components of Partnership for Change conference was dignity and empowerment, the role of women in leadership. We wanted to bring that back to Minneapolis, some portion of that, and present it to our friends here. In doing so, we wanted to find a way to link the core values and principles of the Oslo Center together with something local, a local connection. And what we found was the rich culture of agricultural businesses, agribusiness in Minnesota. And here we found Land O'Lakes, General Mills, Cargill, and others, all of whom have remarkable projects going on all over Africa, primarily Kenya, where the Oslo Center is so deeply engaged today. So, hence, we have the conference that we're putting on today and tomorrow at Augsburg College, Dignity and Empowerment, Women as Key to Global Food Security. In a moment, I will have Jana Aune-Deach, the chair of our planning committee, to come up and introduce our first panel. But before we do so, we want to set the stage by showing a video that has to do with food security. We're going to show that now, and then Jana Aune-Deach, an attorney with Moss & Barnett, will come up and introduce the panel. Thank you very much for being here today.
In today's world, the most important business is growing enough food and ensuring that it reaches everyone. To feed our growing population, we need to increase global food production by 70% before 2050. Women make up the majority of the agricultural workforce in many areas of the world. Yet today, for every investment we make in producing food, we fail to get the best results. Because many women lack the access they need to land, seeds, water, credit, and markets. If we equip women with the right tools, training, and technology, we could see as much as a 30% increase in global food production. This means 150 million more people could have enough to eat each year. Around the world, that change is already underway. In Kenya, women who have access to the same resources as men are seeing a 22% increase in their crop yields. In Bangladesh, mothers who have greater control over their families' funds are spending more on their children's well-being, enabling them to lead healthier and more productive lives. And in Brazil, through programs that target women and strengthen their role in markets. The population in extreme poverty has been cut by half, and malnutrition has been cut by half, and malnutrition has been reduced by 73%.
Come to me now, and lay your hands over me.
If we improve access to opportunities for one woman, we improve our results and grow our economy. Now multiply one woman by hundreds, or thousands, even millions.
And not everything is gonna be the way you think it ought to be. It seems like every time I try to make it right, it all comes down on me. Please say honestly you won't give up on me. I shall believe. I shall believe. I shall believe.
Good morning, everyone. We are very pleased and honored to be part of the Fourth World Conference, and we are very excited to present our first panel. Before I introduce our panelists, I do want to recognize the other committee members who are part of the Oslo Center Dignity and Empowerment Committee. We have Kristen Sundt, and if you could please stand when I call your name. Ingunn Henriksen, Antonia Felix, and Karen Gusas. So I want to thank them for their hard work and dedication in helping to put this program together. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I would like to share with you a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which I think really exemplifies the ideas that we will be discussing as part of the Fourth World Conference and the Dignity and Empowerment Seminar over the next few days. In Washington, D.C. in 1959, Dr. King issued this challenge: make a career of humanity. Commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You will make a greater person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. Each of our four panelists has taken this challenge and has really brought forth in their own specific expertise this noble challenge and commitment. You heard Dr. Meyer's wonderful introduction of Mr. Bondevik. As you know, he's the former Prime Minister of Norway. He is a visionary who had the idea of a world at peace and a world where each individual had the assurance and protection of his or her human rights. And out of that, he created the Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights, where they work for democracy building and to bring political stability to developing countries. We also have with us today Denise O'Brien, who has dedicated her career to the learning, teaching, development, and implementation of sustainable agricultural practices and policies. She has worked to empower women in the area of agriculture. She was appointed by the Obama administration to serve as an agricultural advisor in Afghanistan, and she will share some of those experiences with us today. And we are pleased to have her, and she was also, or is also, the founder of Women, Food, and Agriculture Network. So we are very excited to have her with us today to share her story. We also have a prominent human rights attorney, Vigdis Vevstad, who has advocated tirelessly for the rights of refugees and those seeking asylum and protection. And she has served with the United Nations High Council for Refugees. She has also served with the Norwegian Council for Refugees, and she has advocated tirelessly for human rights for all. So we are so pleased to have her with us today. And then last but not least, we have with us Ingrid Stange. And Orlin gave a brief introduction. She really is a visionary in the area of philanthropy and business, promoting corporate responsibility. She started Partnership for Change, where she has promoted the ideals of social entrepreneurship and corporate responsibility. She also recently founded the Aung San Suu Kyi World Freedom Fund, among her many, many, many list of accomplishments. She has worked for women empowerment, youth empowerment, and we are so excited to have her with us today. I will ask the panel to come forward at this point, and Mr. Bondevik will be our moderator to set the stage for dignity and empowerment.
Thank you so much. And before we start the discussion in the panel, and also gradually we'll include the audience, I will give the floor to each of the panelists to have a brief introduction from their perspective. Around 7 minutes for each of you. Is that okay? And maybe we go in this order. Do you want to sit here, or do you want to go stand up there? It's up to you.
Good. I'm okay sitting here.
Okay, sitting here. So please, Ingrid, you can start.
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying thank you so much for being invited here. It's an honor to be here. And I also, as a Norwegian, have to say I'm very proud to hear our former Prime Minister, Kjell Magne Bondevik, saying all these right things, and I know he means it, and I know he works for it. So it's good to be Norwegian. Just a few words about Partnership for Change, which is my sort of major work now. I founded Partnership for Change a few years ago to set where we have the vision to see a world where we can all live well together within the limits of our planet. Trying to build the awareness of the need to break down the silos, work together to create the necessary changes. So we have an annual conference where we work with, where we showcase good examples of partnerships for where dignity, empowerment, and the human rights are important issues for the change towards a better society. We are working closely with the Oslo Center in the conference, and also we have, together with Kjell Magne Bondevik, created the Aung San Suu Kyi World Freedom Fund, which is a social innovation fund, starting with to see how we can help the Burmese people in building a civil society and a sustainable business world where we don't use the money, all the money that is available actually for Burma right now, in the wrong way. To start with the issues of empowerment and dignity, I have to admit that when I started business, I took my master's degree here in the US at Berkeley, and I, in a way, came out as Mowgli in the jungle because I was not aware of discrimination. When I grew up, my father told me how to make food and how to sew my dresses, and my mother taught me the maths. So I was not used to this world that I came out to. So I was very surprised to see that there was quite a way to go. And I was even more surprised when I saw that we didn't really care. The women of the West didn't really care about what was happening to the women in the less fortunate part of the world. And now, as we see it in Norway, which is a very privileged country, we don't really care about what happens to the women, immigrant women in Norway, that we don't see because they're hidden in their own apartments and they don't have the rights they should have. This surprised me and it scared me, so that's one of the reasons I started the Partnership for Change, to build the awareness of a need to change and the ways that it can be changed. So to the issues of today, we all know the facts, and I think the film that we just saw was very, very good. We carry half the sky and we own about 1% of it. And I was very intrigued by Kevin Lindsay, the Commissioner of Human Rights, saying that we need to find new solutions. And I think it's very important that we understand that we are in the midst of some very significant paradigm shifts in the world today, not only in terms of the migrations, the diasporas from various countries, and the environmental challenges, financial issues. It's a total change in attitudes that is needed for us to change the world for a better place. Knowing that we own only 1% of the earth, and with whatever that includes in lack of participation in decision makings, etc., for us as women in the privileged part of the world, or the open part of the Western world, this is at best annoying. For the women in the third world and those who are not part of the open part of our world, it's a question of life and death. Why is it like this? I think it's a socio-economic question. Women with a high education, we don't see, of course, many women can see the discrimination even if they have a high education, but we are privileged in the way that we operate in situations where men normally also are well educated, so the gender issues are less obvious. And when we access men that are less educated, we are in a position of, as physicians, as professors, as employers, so we don't meet the same attitudes that other women often meet. So we tend to overlook the reality. And I think it's important that we discuss this and also take very much notice of, although there is a lot of formal empowerment in terms of rules saying how women should be treated, how they should have the same rights, it's not always full gender equality, even in Norway. We have some sectors where we have reached far. Medicine, as an example, is a very high percentage of women, more than 50%, leading to a lower income of professors, to be honest. Finance, in Norway, actually, the chair of the largest private bank is a woman. And there's another woman CEO of one of the other major banks. But still, women are not in a large position in finance. In industry in general, mostly only in the family-owned businesses where the women have a leading role. So it isn't fully there. We have generous rules, but it is more different for women. And we talk about this glass roof, and it is still there, I think we have to admit. But I think we also have to see something as women. We have to learn to take pride in the feminine side of our society. We should not, when we go into the men's world, behave as men. We should behave as women, because otherwise the world will not get all the resources that Kjell Magne talked about when it comes to getting not only 50% of the world's resources on the table, but also another way of thinking. I think it's important that we women maintain our way of thinking, because that's the way I think we can ensure a more sustainable world. So we must not say that the only way to be empowered is to take the men's jobs or to take the men's way of working. We have to keep our values. We also have to make the world, I'm sorry, I cannot see on my watch how far, so you have to tell me.
2 more minutes. 2 more minutes, I give you. Yeah.
We have to make sure that the young generation of women do not take for granted what we and our mothers and our grandmothers fought for. Because what I see right now is they are jeopardizing all the rights that have been developed. I see now from the younger generation a world where they sort of dream about the 50s, where the men took charge and the ladies dressed up for them to come home from job. I think that has come from the movie industry or something, but we see, even in Norway, we see a change back to the... My old father of 92 is scared when he sees what the young girls do now. So just to say that even if we have come far, the young generation can easily forget the needs to keep the power that we have reached. Also, we have to be sure we are not fearing religious discrimination so much that we do not dare to speak loud about the discrimination that is being done against women in the Muslim societies of, even in Norway. They should have the same rights as us, and we should dare to say that. We are a little too polite in Norway, so sometimes we accept that women are harassed by their men when they come from religious minorities. And also, it's important that we must not mistake as I said, the formal empowerment with the real empowerment. So with this said, I think we can have some more questions afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ingrid, for your intervention, from your perspective, also working so much with social entrepreneurship. And then we go further to the next member of this panel, Denise O'Brien, who is also working especially in the agriculture sector. And we will welcome your assessment from your perspective.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this program today. I feel, Commissioner Lindsay, somewhat like you do. I was telling my husband, I think, we'll see. I feel like I'm a little out of my league with this, but I appreciate the opportunity because my work is my passion, and women and agriculture are my passion. Raising food is my passion. I'm an organic farmer in Iowa, and about 5 hours south of here, and it's what I do. It's what keeps me the person that I am. I'm grounded, and I experienced, yesterday on my way up here, I had a meeting with a group of Iowa farm women, some farmers, some not, and it keeps me so totally based in the work that I do when I meet with everyday women who are feeding their families, feeding their communities, and feeding and taking care of the land. And so I wanted to bring up a couple of things in my presentation about having the privilege of being in North America and being a farmer, and some of the parallels between the developing world and women farmers. Women farmers in the developing nations have the face of the farmer. We in the developed nations, mostly it's the male face, although many women are doing agriculture. And the demographics are pointing to women are going into agriculture at a faster pace than men are, growing food for their families and communities on smaller acreages and utilizing livestock, which is very parallel to what women do in other parts of the country. In other parts of the world, I must say. So one of the things that we have the privilege of in our country is that we can own land. Women own land. And there's been a change over the last few years where women now own 51% of the farmland in the United States, very solidly in the Midwest, Iowa, Minnesota, and rentable farmland. And we've got a change in in agriculture where we used to have owner-operators, the people who owned the land, operated the land. Now we have absentee landowners in the majority, where there's many tenant farmers who rent from owners. Those landowners many times are women. So what we have now is that women of an older generation are owning land but not making decisions about their land. And what we have in developing countries are women who grow the food but don't have access to owning the land in many countries. I've been to numbers of international meetings where this is very prevalent, that the women who are farming are hoping, you know, that if something happens in their family or to their spouse, that the spouse's family will keep them in their family and keep them, you know, their ability to farm. This was a woman from Kenya that had told me this. Her husband was very ill, and she was worried about her future as being a provider for her family. So we have the assets of land, and in the developing countries, they don't have the assets of land, nor do they have many times access to seeds. So there's some very interesting things that are happening. We, as a #1, Iowa is very proud of saying they're #1 in growing food. And we never finished that growing #1 with at what cost. And I think many people are becoming extremely aware of the environmental costs of our type of industrial agriculture that we have. We are so efficient and we are so good at making food, but we have also suffered great environmental disasters as a result of that, and are continuing on that parallel. And so in order for us to continue to grow food, for food security, for our own families, our own community, our own country, we need to take care of the natural resources, and this is a very major concern now about what is happening to the depletion of our soil. The Midwest was just, you know, when the colonizers came through, it was just like, oh wow, you know, this is incredible. The soil is so deep and so, you know, so full of life. Well, that soil out there, when you drive in the rural areas now, is pretty much dead. We've killed it. You know, we've killed it with different chemicals because we're using it as a median, and not to grow things in and take things away from, and we're not replenishing it. But I must say there's hope in this, because women who own the land want natural resource and conservation practices. Women in the developing countries know how to use scarce resources and use them diligently to be able to raise that food for their family. So there's you know, it wouldn't seem as though there were very many parallels, but I see them daily. And the environmental degradation is something that everyone's concerned about, but people who live and work in it daily know what's happening to the soil. And the male face of agriculture in the United States, there was a book written in the 1970s called The Invisible Farmer, and it was about women in the United States who really are farmers, but they're invisible. And there's many rights that have not been given to women farmers until, well, when I first started farming with my husband, I had to have a power of attorney to go into a government office to sign papers for him. You know, that was 1980. No, that's not that long ago. That's changed now, but women have really, you know, take pride in being able to be that person who holds, you know, the family and farm together. And as new farmers emerge, young women are coming into the fold of farming. I think I'm optimistic about the future, because I think people are taking into consideration the condition of the soil and the natural resource as we go into the future. I also don't have a watch, and so...
No, but you have 1 more minute.
1 more minute, okay. I can do that, okay. Once I get started, it's a little bit hard to control my passion about this, so... but I do want to say that you know, we need to look at everything that we see outside of the city, and I mean, the city has very many green spaces, but when you get outside of the city and you see the rolling hills of corn and soybeans and hay and everything, people need to, our urban population mostly, and we're so few of us farmers anymore, need to look at that and question at what cost. I think we need to add that little piece, and what we need to encourage and incentivize is the preservation of our natural resources, that we can continue to do this. And I think this drought this year in our Midwestern section and on our farm has brought those to light. We're pretty abundant in water until this year, and it's like, oh my, what is this short term? Is it long term? What are we going to do to prepare? And I think women are in a very good position to take care of that. And on a last note, I've been over the years and with my organization, one of the reasons we started the organization Women, Food and Agriculture Network was because women's voices are not heard in agriculture. So I look at organizations and I pretty much zero in right away on board of directors compositions. And agriculture organizations have very poor representation from women, although we, again, should have that representation. Women in politics is very scarce. My organization has a farm to politics leadership development to help women develop the skills to be able to run for political office. So it's not just about food, it's not just about the farm, it's about the broader picture of food security in our world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Then we go further to the third panelist, Vigdis Vevstad. She is also a consultant on the international refugee and asylum law. And at the same time, she is a member of the board of directors of the Oslo Center, as Ingrid Stange is member of our board of trustees. So please, Vigdis, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I wish I could dismiss this whole sector of the conference. I wish I could dismiss the necessity of giving particular focus to empowerment of women. I wish that the logic of equality between men and women were not only words, but truly a reality, both in context and in every country. But we know better, and therefore I thank you for arranging this conference, and I also thank you for inviting me to participate and also to be able to speak. Let me start by giving some food for thought, which I picked up from a Norwegian newspaper, Aftenposten, on Sunday. It says there, it's an article about empowerment of women, actually. It says something about women taking over. And it read, in 27 out of 34 industrialized countries, more women than men have finished university education. In Bahrain and Qatar, 70% of the women have a university degree. 1/3 of Brazilian women earn more than their husbands. Since 2009, more than half the jobs in the US are employed by women. And women in China own more than 40% of the private companies. I thought that would be also some interesting piece of information to bring to the conference. And for our perspective, it's not all gloomy. My perspective as a lawyer, of course, is the law, the empowerment of law. And as both Kjell Magne Bondevik and also Ingrid Stange mentioned, the law is necessary, but the law has to be implemented. I think, Ingrid, you used another word. You were saying that formal empowerment should not be forgotten. I mean, real empowerment should not be forgotten because of formal empowerment. I think it says the same thing, really. Now, I think this actual implementation of the norms is the real challenge of the world today. How to ensure the implementation of the norms, of the human rights norms worldwide. And this is also why I see the role of civil society as so important. For example, the Oslo Center in its work towards enhancement of human rights and establishment of democracy and democracy building. Also the work of organizations such as Amnesty International and other watchdogs in the NGO community. But I also see the importance of the business community giving their voice to human rights engagement as other actors, lawyers, judges, and so on. Now, human rights principles include the principle of non-discrimination, we know that. And they also include the right to food. This is part of the rights of economic and social and cultural rights enshrined in the 1966 Covenant from the UN. But we still know that about 800 million people are still hungry. The Covenant says also that the aims of those principles, those legal principles, should be progressively achieved. Now, it's been a long time since 1966. But we saw some figures on the film, and I appreciated seeing also that it is possible to come further. What the covenant does not say, but what could be added here, is to emphasize the women's role as the main caretakers of the family and therefore of the next generations. It is therefore empowerment of women means also empowerment of future generations. So simple and so important. I'm very aware that I come from the luxury of a Norwegian society where equal rights between men and women to a large extent are being respected. But also I think it's important to mention that we have a couple of reports, one from 2011 and one from 2012, two research reports, that show facts and analysis of the equality between men and women. And the reports indicate that in spite of the progress made, men's privileges prevail. Still, the majority of the power elite, 3 out of 4 top leaders are men. Ingrid, you also mentioned the same equivalent. And this is in spite of similar education possibilities and educations. And also the average income of women is still 2/3 of that of men. That's also a little bit gives food for thought. But on the other hand, I totally agree that we have come a long way and we are privileged. And if we compare with the situation of many of our sisters around the world, I think a lot needs to be done, maybe in Norway, but a lot needs to be done worldwide. And for one thing, I think what lesson learned maybe from Norway is that Norway is a society which is not so attached to the traditions anymore. We are not claiming that traditions must be kept, but we see this phenomenon in many other parts of the world. And to put things in perspective, when the right to vote was introduced in Europe, and that's not so long ago, there were more women against giving the right to vote to women than men. Now, tradition is one of the main factors oppressing women, and unfortunately, women also contribute to it themselves, as I said. In India and in Bangladesh, for example, girls die from malnutrition because they're given less nutritious food than the boys. And we know that in many African countries, there's a tradition of genital mutilation out of tradition. So is there a way out? I think education and I think awareness building can contribute to enabling women to claim their position and their right to health and to food, to jobs, to participation in political life, elections and so on, and also to enable women to challenge traditions which may be contrary to their own interest. I also think that this will contribute to poverty reduction, one of the global aims of our times. So, if I may reiterate, the norms are there to a large extent, they're there in place, but it is the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vigdis. And I will start by challenging these 3 women with some questions. I was rather liberal and flexible on the time of speech for you, but I was privileged as a man to have 30 minutes, and you together also had about the same now. So we have a balance now. And we go further on. Ingrid, you are especially engaged in the field of social entrepreneurship. And what will you say about the role of women in that regard, specifically? Are women equal with men to make social entrepreneurship, to build up business activities and companies in Norway and elsewhere?
Yes, I would say absolutely. Not having any statistics on this, because this is such a new field that there isn't very strong statistics, but from what I see both in Norway and internationally, there is a majority of women in social entrepreneurship. And I think the reason for that is that, one, we I think I dare say that we are better at seeing the problems close to us and finding solutions. We are used to that because you normally have so many tasks to do at the same time that you have to be creative. So yes, I think there are more women in social entrepreneurship than men.
And is there also equality with regard to wages, to income in that field? Or is it discrimination against women?
No, I don't think there would be. You couldn't say there would be discrimination against women there. The issues with social entrepreneurship, of course, as with all kinds of entrepreneurship, is that there is a hurdle of creating financial earnings from an entrepreneurship effort. So I think every entrepreneur has a challenge in coming to a financially sustainable position, but I don't think there is any discrimination there.
Dennis, if we move further on to the agriculture sector, where you are especially engaged, and you gave us some examples from both the US and the developed world and from developing countries. But if we have a special look now at developing countries, very often we have the impression when we are visiting such countries that the women have the real heavy burden of farming. But the man takes the income. And this is, of course, very unfair. Can you elaborate a little bit more how this can be changed?
You know, that's a big change. It has to do with tradition, with culture, with so many things that I think the way we can help influence change is to help. It's about mentoring, it's about living by example, about role modeling. I mean, that's a very, very big task. And I work through Iowa State University, and we bring women farmers over here. I just met several this last week, and from Uganda, and there's many times we go to other countries, and one of the ways that we can support is that I've noticed over my lifetime of travel and visiting with people is to show our support, to know that they're not alone where they're working. Substantial change can only happen from within, and from within that country, and from within the communities. And when traditions are so strong in that, it's hope. I have hope that the youth will see and be influenced by, and even in the developed countries, by what changes can be made for their own countries, and the value of women and women's position in food security and in food sovereignty. And in many instances in the past, our U.S. food aid has been directed towards the men, totally missing the real farmer. That's been changed in some respects, and the aid and technical assistance in that we're giving is now more directed to women. So just the fact that they're recognized as farmers, I think, is a big help from our aid organizations. But that's something that has to happen at a very organic core level, and we can only attempt to influence.
Vigdis, since you are also a lawyer and know the Norwegian legislation with regard to equality between men and women, and we have the equal rights law in Norway, and we have, as I also mentioned in my speech, the quota system in some fields, even in business, companies' boards. When you go to other countries and present these examples, and especially in developing countries, how is that received? Is it possible to convey our way of thinking with regard to legislation to other, but not only Western countries, but also countries in the South?
I wish I knew completely. I haven't really brought this particular part of law and discussed it with colleagues in many different countries. But from discussions among ourselves, I think a lot of people react and look at it as positively. especially for a transition period. And then there are others who are opposed. I was telling you last night about the personal experience when this law was introduced in Norway, for example, when I was a young professional just come out of university, and I was on a quota in a public committee. And what happened was, and this was of course a number of years ago, and what happened was that one of the other female participants in the committee spoke out when I had stated my view on a particular question, and said, please disregard what was just said because this lady is here on the quota. You know, and this is also something, so I think it's, we are quite used to it now in Norway, and we don't react in the same way, but I think for countries where it is not usual, the same could happen as happened to me as a young lawyer, I think. And it's not very pleasant.
Yes, and I will also ask the audience to prepare for questions and comments to the panelists here. But when you're doing that, let me follow up with another example from Norway about how the quota system can work with regard to political parties. Because we have the quota system in most parties in Norway, that it should be at least 40% of both sexes in the boards, for instance. And I remember the convention of the party which I belong to, the Christian Democratic Party, some years ago, that they were going to elect the board members for the next term. And the outcome of the election was that it was more than 60% women. And that was in contradiction to the rules of the party, the bylaws. So they had to take a second round of election to reduce the number of female members of the board so it could come under 60, so the man could come above 40. So we have come in a situation where men need the quota system. Normally we think that it's the women who need the quota. But this was an example of the opposite, and that's very interesting, of course. Before we invite you now from the audience to participate, could we also touch upon a sensitive issue with regard to the rights of the women and equality, and that is when we come to Muslim-dominated countries. I think we have, maybe all of us, experiences on discussing these matters with Muslim religious leaders, and that can be a rather tough discussion because, of course, they in principle agree with us about equal rights for men and women, but when it comes to implementation and praxis, it can be very sensitive because they have some of them at least have their own approach and perspective on how men and women are equal. For some of them, that does not mean equal rights to participate in public life and in religious life. Do you have any experience of that in your different sectors, social entrepreneurship or agriculture or legislation and law? Any of you who want to comment on that? How should we approach Muslim religious leaders in this regard? Ingrid, you want to?
I have one, a little on the side of what you asked for, which is something that none of us have mentioned right now, which is extremely important when it comes to empowering the Muslim women in Norway. We have been quite good at getting a large amount of a large portion of the women, the girls, students taking science subjects, medicine subjects at the university level. So there is a large group of women taking higher education because that's their way of coming out of their situation, whereas the men fail. Not only the ethnical Norwegian drop out of school, but a very high portion of the the non-Norwegian ethnical groups drop out of high school because the school system is very much based on the women's way of learning very often. So we have an issue then of disempowering immigrant men which makes them an angry group. And we have to make sure we take care of empowering them also. And I also know the same issue from Ethiopia, where I have been working not only among Muslim but also Christians. We forget to empower the men. We are very much working with the women, and then the men see the women go away, getting higher education and getting more help, while they sit there and feel sort of left behind. So that's another important issue that we should. But with men, I have not worked with religious leaders from the Muslim world, so I cannot answer.
Denise, is it right that you also have some experience from Afghanistan and can draw upon that?
Right, and again, I don't have experience with Muslim male leaders, but my experience in Afghanistan, one of my biggest disappointments was that I didn't work with women. I didn't have the opportunity to. That mostly happened because I was with with what was called a province reconstruction team. So it was civilian and military. So I was very much embedded with the military, and so that prevented even much contact with Afghan farmers themselves. But the women, the programs that were going on for women, like poultry cooperatives, gardening, everything with the women who I did engage with happened behind walls, behind barriers. There were I just think of Afghan women with all the barriers and trying to work through that. And even when I went, there was one meeting in particular with women who were doing a poultry cooperative, and we were talking about the income and how they were raising, what it was, the money that they raised from the chickens was used to buy the Malik's gas fuel for his motorcycle. But there is a program that's going on, and this again doesn't address so much the Muslim, but in a sense it does. There is a banking system that was being set up that women could have direct deposits through cell phones into bank accounts that men didn't have access to. And it was one of those things that I think sometimes it's that control of the financial, that there's things that have to be circumvented in order for women to be able to have access. And that was one of the programs that was going on that I think was being fairly successful.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on this, Vigdis?
Yes, just a brief comment. It's as a lawyer, you tend to think along legal terms, and you would say, well, you have to accept that there are different interpretations. But what I see your question is more again linked to what I was talking about in regard to tradition, and in tradition can inhibit the development of this law. This law is not, the idea of a religious leader or anyone else. We are speaking about principles which are enshrined in international instruments. And I think through dialogue and explanation, this is the way to go to help those who are not familiar with it understand what it really contains.
And I think you as a lawyer as well, about the Sharia legislation in some Muslim-dominated countries, in relation to the equal rights for men and women, which can be really complicated to adjust in a way. Have you any experience from that? If it's possible to combine the Sharia legislation in a Muslim country with the conventions of equal rights?
Shall I be honest?
Of course. It's only between us, to be honest.
Yes, I think it is very difficult. But I also see that Sharia law is an interpretation by men. So here we have a segregation between religious law and civil law. And when those two go together, you have a situation like you have in a country like Iran, for example. And I cannot see that this can go along in parallel with the principles of human rights that Iran has adopted and puts its signature to. I cannot see that those two go together.
From my own experience, let me just mention, I've been to Iran several times in a project that the Oslo Center had together with former President Mohammed Khatami, and we had very interesting discussion about men and women and equal rights and relation to Sharia legislation. It's very interesting that in a country as Iran, the level of education among women is very high. They have more female students at the university in Iran than male students. But on the other hand, it's no doubt that the women are discriminated, both in public life and in religious life, with regard to get job opportunities and so on. But I wonder how long this can last. Because, as Ingrid and others have emphasized here, education is really a source of empowerment of women. And therefore, I'm in a way optimistic, because when they are so highly educated, I think that in the longer perspective, they will not accept a situation of so strong discrimination as you have in this country and in others as well. So I do hope that education will empower them. Well, we have come now to a phase in this session where we want to invite people from the audience, and I think we have some microphones available here, which you can use, so you can just stand up, raise your hands now first, and so stand up where you are sitting and put questions or comments to what we are discussing. So please, be not too humble, feel free. We have one up at the last row there, or was it one here first? Yeah, you can start. And so one up on the last row.
Is it on?
Okay. It's working.
Okay. Just want to say thank you everyone for, it's a wonderful panel, and I think it's a wonderful and important discussion. I think my question deals a little bit with what else has already been mentioned, but sort of in the realm of universalism versus cultural relativism. And Ingrid Stange, you mentioned a little bit with Muslims in Norway and not to speak up. And I think sort of my question is, and coming with my Norwegian lens, and I think that women empowerment, obviously, it's a universal right. But unfortunately, that's not how it is in all these countries. So I think my question is, how do we go about this task in the sort of realm of universal versus cultural relativism, while ensuring that the women are safe in this process and also it can be sustained. So I guess in a sense to avoid an ends justify the means sort of task while we're trying to make a greater good in the end. Thank you.
Any of you want to comment on this? Ingrid, or?
Well, if I had known the answer, I think we had solved the, the world problem. But I think the way we are working in partnership with Change is that we try to find the good examples and lifting them up, not only to showcase for others to get good ideas and inspire them, but also to help those who are doing right things and are on the right track. For example, there is an Indian woman in Norway that is a Muslim who left her husband that she was forced into marrying, with whom she had 2 children. She divorced. She was left out of her family, and she was left out of her whole community. And then she started getting into the Norwegian community. She has now become a star in Norway. She had her birthday 3 days ago, and she had 700 congratulations on Facebook. And so what we try to do with persons like that is help lift them up, show that they can do it, and help them do it, and make them stars, because then others see that it's possible. She has now started a company where she helps other Muslim women, mothers and daughters, find the way into the society on their own, within their own limitations. And I think also, when you said that 30 years ago you had to have permission from your husband, there was a sort of laughing in here. And I also, growing up in the southern Norway, where there are many religious groups from various parts, some of those religious groups were very highly discriminating of women, defining how they should dress, defining that they should not take education, etc. That is no longer so. So changes have happened. Mm-hmm. And I think that change will happen also in the traditions that we see from the Muslim world. And I'm sure there are traditions that we need to change. But I think it's very important that we think, as I think Kevin Lindsay said, that we have to think differently, we have to find new solutions, and I think we have to help each other do that. And I think we should not see ourselves as knowing the answer, because we probably do a lot of stupid things ourselves, we don't see it.
Others who want to comment on this question, or do we go further to the next one? It was up there at the last road. Or there, okay.
Hello, my name is Angeline.
Can
My
you please
question is-
stand up? It's easier to hear you.
My question is for Ingrid. I'm a recent graduate from University of Minnesota and going into public policies. I heard you say about women in Norway, in the Muslim women, and going into schools, and sort of the men sort of falling back because there's women's way of teaching is more supported. My question comes down to, and a concern, that how does that women gain equality and authority after they graduate from the university, that is supported women, the protection and equality and security for women, how is that implemented or affected?
I think, Vigdis, you may know more about this than I do, but my understanding is that many of those women who take an education and take a degree don't necessarily go into professional work. But those who do, of course, they come into they are easier integrated into the society. But I don't know the statistics here. But I do know that there is a lot of frustration among men, and which makes them angry, and which makes them go into less productive ways of reacting.
I'm not sure that I can add so much to what Ingrid is saying here, but I still question the comment of them not going into professional work. It is my impression that they do go into professional work if they manage to find it, and for professionals such as doctors, like you were mentioning, they do manage to find work because there's a lack of doctors. In fact, we import medical personnel from abroad even. But that does not disregard the fact that what you're saying, that there are men who feel less empowered. But I wonder if there is also a difference here between first-generation immigrants and second-generation immigrants. What we see now is mainly, isn't it, that it's the second-generation immigrant children who are getting this higher education, and they really work hard for it and manage.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, what we see is that for immigrants, the dream of getting, it's sort of the American dream, you have to get the education, you have to get up and coming in your new country. And it's very important for them to take education. So there is a higher percentage of immigrants taking higher education than it is of ethnic Norwegians. And they have higher grades from elementary school. So there is obviously a very clear, ambitious work there. I won't be very strict on the number of women staying home and not working, but this is something I have from the woman I just mentioned, that she's worried about women taking higher education and not doing anything with it. But I haven't seen the statistics of it.
More questions or comments from the audience? Yes, up there.
Good morning. Thank you to the panel for the discussion. A lot of food for thought. My name is Madeline Williams. I work for USAID, and I'm on sabbatical for a year, so I'm happy to be back in Minnesota. I just wanted to ask a question to the panel about the importance of media, and not so much social media, but formal media, if you could call it that. I think there's a disconnect very often in societies between formal political structures and associational life. And so when that happens, the importance of information, access to information for women or other excluded groups is very important. And I wondered what you thought the role of the media is, specifically the formal media, and the importance of information sharing. I think social media is a great venue for the kind of support you were talking about for individuals, and there's a lot of power in that. I'm wondering about access to information and transparency in society. When you start to talk about political change and transformation, people need access to information in order to understand what the issues are and to be able to vote on those issues, to participate in them and make them meaningful to their everyday lives. So the question is really about the role of media and the relationship between associational life and political leadership.
Wow. Yeah. Any of you want to comment on that, or Ingrid?
I can tell you that every breakfast in my home we have a high discussion on the role of media, because my husband is chairing the major media company in Scandinavia. And I claim that media does not use their role as they should. I think they should be much more concerned about what they use their important newspapers for. Make transparency obvious, to show how things are being doing right and not necessarily being done wrong. I think they should show the good examples also, and not only give stories about big TV stars having changed their lover or something like that. But
I do agree with Ingrid, also from a male perspective, and let me just add that at least there is some progress home in Norway in this regard. I know, for instance, that the Norwegian broadcasting, which is still dominating both with regard to TV and radio, they are very aware of this challenge, and I think it's also so important who they interview in the news programs and in the talk shows, and that should not only be men but women as well. And I know that they have worked out some lists of names of female leaders in Norway who could be interesting voices to hear in the programs. And I know that they from time to time go through these lists and update them, and they use the names from the lists when they are deciding who they will go to interview and to participate in talk show programs in Norway, both in radio and TV. And that's a very concrete way of doing it, to get a better balance. Yes, should we go further on? There were one hand there, from the lady up there, you can, and so then the other one down on this road. Can you give the mic to this lady?
There's a question there also.
Yes, and afterwards we go over there, but first this lady.
Ladies first, yeah.
Ladies first.
Thank you. Tack så mycket. My name is Amel Gorani, and I'm an international development specialist. I've lived in Sweden for many years and worked on integration issues in Sweden, but also in Scandinavia more broadly. And I agree with you about the difficulty of handling, discriminatory practices within different cultural contexts and how sensitive that can be. But equally so, I think there are other, more structural barriers that we are often don't do enough in tackling, identifying, and mostly sharing experiences across countries, across nations. For example, just looking at the North in the West, the experience in the US and the experience, for example, in Scandinavian countries, given the different systems, there is a lot to learn, and there are advantages in both systems. Looking at discriminatory practices against immigrant groups, for example, and most prominently, like looking at Muslim women. If you look at women who are wearing the hijab and the practices that prevent them from coming into the labor market, the same groups, Somali groups, for example, just to look at Minnesota here, having the largest Somali diaspora in the US, the same women wearing the hijab fare much better. So I was wondering if you could reflect on, you know, what is Norway doing, for example, or what are some of the best practices that you are seeing or adopting, or how would you like to see these issues being tackled, and what opportunities for cross-learning in a forum such as this, which is, you know, a great way and a great place to start. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a special challenge to you from Norway here. Vigdis, will you start?
Yes, I can start. I thank you for bringing in this perspective, and I think already, and I agree with you that creating a forum like this of cross-cultural meetings and dialogue is one way of going about. Now, within a country, to start acknowledging the fact that we have become a multicultural world, I think is point number one. And I still think that it's pretty far to go still. We haven't come very far. But one of the good things that I see in the Norwegian society, for example, is the possibility for immigrants to go to language school and also to cultural school in order to learn about the Norwegian society. And I think this should be a possibility for all immigrants. Now, it is for those who come in through family reunification programs, largely, those who come in as refugees, but not for all. Not for those who are, for example, married to Norwegian citizens. It is not necessarily something which you are obligated to attend. But I think that is one way to learn about this new society. The other side would be for the Norwegian society to learn more about the new cultures who are coming to Norway. And that is less. And here I would tend to agree very much with what Ingrid is saying about the role of the media. And I think they could do much more, actually, to create meeting places and discussion places. And I think it would be interesting for all. And I think we really haven't come very far. Now, to your question about the hijab, there's no prohibition against using hijab in Norway. There was a discussion on the use of hijab in regard to those who wanted to become police officers. As far as I know, there is no prohibition against the use also in police school. But I think the debate sort of died out. It was heated for a while and then it went out. So there's, unlike some other European countries where there is actually a prohibition, such as France and Belgium now also.
Ingrid.
I just want to fill in here also on your specific question of the Somali group, the diaspora group you have here in Minnesota. And this is an example of the Oslo Center work, which is very good. What we realize in Norway is that we have done a very bad job on integration, especially of the Somali group, which is the newest group of a large, it's the largest new group of immigrants in Norway. And knowing that this has been a better, a larger success here in Minnesota, maybe you wouldn't agree that it's been a success, I don't know, but it's been much better here than in Norway. So the Oslo Center, together with the American Embassy, has created a program where we, in Norway, have created something called Norwegian Somalian Bridge Building, where we learn from what has been done right here in Minnesota. And that work has been going on now for a year, and we had at our last Partnership of Change conference in March, we had a whole workshop where we brought in Somali youth from 3 countries, or 3 Scandinavian countries, with the workshops on where they could learn tasks that would help them getting into the workforce, and where we also had groups from Minnesota coming on and helping to start a program there. So this is a very specific example where we can learn from the US and especially from this area. So, and I agree, we have a lot to learn. And there is another place where we have a lot to learn from the US. When asylum seekers come into Norway, they are put away in a sort of a center where they should stay. And that could be for half a year or 1.5 years. and they don't get into the society, and this is a very bad start of your life in a new country. We have some very close friends from Bosnia who came, and this was a car repairman. He was not allowed to go out and repair cars. He was forced to sit in 1.5 years in this place after being a prisoner in the concentration camp. That was not very good for him. So he started to just go out to the bus companies and said, "Can I please repair buses for free? I need to do some work." And we need to learn from the US there, because you take immigrants in in a better way.
Thank you. Then I just have to inform that we have less than 10 minutes more now before we have to close this session. But now, in order also to get a better gender balance in the debate, please, the man over there.
I guess comment, is this working? Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much for speaking. This is reminiscent of a discussion we had in my international security class freshman year at the University of St. Thomas here in Minnesota. But obviously this is at a much higher level, so this is kind of a dream come true for me. So thank you very much. My question, I guess, is a short one, and it goes out to the entire panel, maybe Ms. O'Brien. You are more suited to answer this, but I guess anyone who wants to can jump on. And this goes back to what you were talking about in the first session, Mr. Bondevik. So my question is, in failed and failing states, like you were talking about, the ones that kind of, you know, the main goal is to keep the political structure together, to just keep everybody from fighting. How do you maintain those women's roles and those women's roles in public places, not just in, you know, farming and what else, but you know, in the higher realms of society, so to speak, when the traditional view in the majority of the world is, you know, male-dominated society. You know, how do you, I guess, how do you stop regressing to that mindset every time society falls to trouble? And then on the flip side, when a society is rebuilding, when is the appropriate time for women to ask for those public places and get their voice heard in society? So thank you.
Denise? Yes.
So I'd like to address the second part first, is that women shouldn't have to ask, and that it should be as the Constitution, such as in Afghanistan, the Constitution was put together, and I don't remember the exact wording, but 28% of the parliament in Afghanistan is women. And that's more than the United States. I think we have 16% or 14%. It's not very good. But these women are in danger every day of their lives by participating in a system that, because of religion or because of politics or because of war, you know, their lives are in danger. They also, those women also come from a privileged class, and it's very interesting what I witnessed. There's a there's a Directorate of Women's Affairs, and they're at the national level, and then there's 32 provinces that have DAOs at those levels, 34 provinces, and all of those women are appointed, and so there is an addressing women's issues there, but sometimes it depends on the people who are appointed to those positions, and some women get it and work on domestic violence and entrepreneurship and then there's other women that don't know really or are not empowered about their role. And I know international organizations working with these women to help empower that, because that is a very, you know, that's not a part of what they've had in the past, but hopefully working forward into the future. So I think as we, as developing nations, as NGOs, and that working with countries that have been in conflict and post-conflict, again, is working on those democracies, those democratic principles that include women, so that women don't have to ask.
Thank you. Could you leave a mic over to the lady just in front of me here? Could you come down with the mic? And so I see one more hand, and that must be the last one before we have to close.
Good morning. My name is Kayla. I'm a student here at the Humphrey pursuing my Master's in Development Practice. And a topic we've discussed is that often women's work or the tasks performed by women aren't counted in local and global economies, such as homemaking, raising children, etc. So how can we move forward to change how we value and count women's work or the jobs often performed by women in order to empower women going forward?
Any of you who want to comment on that?
I think it's an extremely important question, and I'm glad it comes from a young woman.
Yes.
This has something to do with what I said first. We have to acknowledge the female values, because I think it's an extremely important job. For me, it doesn't make sense that I should go out taking care of other people's children so that somebody else can go home and take care of my children, because that would give me points for the pension fund. But it wouldn't give me points if I were home. Right now, I think thanks to your government, there were some changes there.
Yeah, it was.
But in social acceptance, it's not accepted to stay home looking after your own children. It's very accepted to go and look after others' children. We have a job to do there. We have to be proud of the feminine values. So thank you.
Thank you, and I fully agree, and it's easier for you as women to say this than for me as a man. So the last question from the audience up there, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My question probably is a little strange, and I don't mean to shift it. As I have listened to you this morning and the issues that I know you are addressing regarding women, I can't help but draw the parallel between what you're saying about women's issues and what have been historically the issues of minority groups, and particularly African Americans in America. So my question is, what kind of historical relevance have you been able to address in the struggle for the equality of women from the experience of, say, African Americans in America, and what are we doing about the similarities in the issues and the need perhaps to unite the struggle of women and other people who are denied their right and justice, so that at some point we stop addressing singular issues in silos rather than the cross-fertilization of efforts that other groups have tried to get this justice and equality.
Thank you. This question and comment was highly appreciated, as you understood from the applause. Maybe we should just give you 1 minute, each of you, before we close. And you can, if you want, also comment on this last question. We start with Vigdis.
I would very much give you applause for your intervention, and I think especially what you say about the cross-fertilization is important. But I also think it's important to remind all of us that we started off with sets of human rights which were generalized, and then we started singling out certain groups of people who needed particular protection, such as women, such as children, such as refugees, such as, specific conventions were made so as to protect certain groups. And I think we need that as well. I think we need both. I think we need the acknowledgement of the universal principles, but then I also think we need, and also including racial discrimination and discrimination, obviously. So I think we need both, actually. I think we need the specific rules, and I think we need the cross-fertilization.
Thank you. And go then, Denise.
Well, I'm just hoping that the day that we aren't segmented comes in my lifetime. And it seems to me that when we put things in sector, it disperses the energy, or it kind of diffuses the energy, and so there's certain things as human rights to work on, that we need to cross all of that. And I appreciate also your comment on that. One of the ways we've done it in Women, Food and Agriculture, that we've been trying to work on this, is that cross-fertilization of knowing our history and whose shoulders we are standing on. And I think it's really incumbent. I see that we talked a little bit about the younger generation and the historical perspective of where fight and civil rights and women's rights and all come out of, and who are those heroes and heroines that did that. And it's not always so much those individuals, but the grouping, the group, or the organizations as a whole that move towards that. And I think it's imperative that we teach those things as we go on, because it's like, we're doing this and it's new, it's not new. I had shoulders of other organic farmers to stand on when, that paved the way, and also women and also rural people. So I think it's very important to incorporate that into the work that we do with our organizations.
And Ingrid.
Yeah, I think a response to your question is I agree totally, and there is a lot to learn. Unfortunately, it's not only a historic issue with the ethnic discrimination, especially not in Norway, but I think the basic value here is dignity. It's about dignity for all human beings, children, all groups, and that if you can understand that, we don't have the issues anymore. And to take care of those issues, I think we have to be aware that also ethnical discrimination is worse on women than on men, because women have sort of they are minority in two ways. So I think we still have to work on the women's side, but basically always thinking of dignity as the basic value.
Thank you, and that must be the last word. And I want to thank the panel, and we give them a big hand. And then Jana will take over.
Thank you so much to the panel for such an informative and provocative discussion and conversation this morning. For those of you who have a ticket for the luncheon, we ask that you move very quickly into the atrium and be seated before 12:10 so that we can get started. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming this